Hello everyone, this is Rio Cloud Sync. Today we're going to be going through the Microsoft security best practices as well as the zero trust approach Microsoft advertises across all their M365 and Azure technologies. I've put together a quick presentation from a high level perspective of remediation actions you can take within your current estate and organization to limit threat actor exposure, as well as just streamlining all your M365 estate alongside your Azure estate, and just making sure you've got some touching points in terms of a single pane of glass for reporting and analytics. So if we go to the next slide. So in terms of Microsoft security, it is defined that they're adopting the approach of zero trust principles, and there are three foundational principles which Microsoft adhere to and advertise across their customer base. Okay, it's verify, always authenticate, and authorize based on all available data points. So Microsoft basically they don't care who you are. You always need to verify. So that's the process of authenticating and being authorized off the back of that. Okay, just say for example, you're in an office environment. You've got a key fob. You're going into the building. You're tapping your card. First of all, that's authenticating you, just making sure you are who you say you are, and then the process of authorization is allowing you into to the office space, into the building. Okay, as well as user least privileged access. So this is the just-in-time factors as well as just enough access. The leverage of privileged identity management, for example. So just making sure you've got the relevant role-based access control according to the ability to make amendments, as well as, for example, create users, create resources, and only when necessary you should leverage into or alleviate yourself into these privileged roles. Okay. And then the third touching point is assume breach. At all given times, it should be zero trust. So we should assume breach at all times. So we should be putting in the necessary services in play to reduce tenant exposure. With the likes of Microsoft Defender for Endpoint or Microsoft Defender for 365, you've got the touching points there to see that single pane of glass and where recommendation actions should be exhibited to obviously reduce the tenant exposure, as well as having that SIEM and that SOAR solution in play to maybe notify particular global admins as and when there is a potential breach, and just that proactive threat monitoring in terms of attack simulation, making sure you're ahead of the curve in terms of threat actors trying to gain access, with the likes of enforcement of MFA, enforcement of just-in-time access, and all these three touching points. They can expand into many different scenarios along the way. So never trust and always verify at any given time. What services do Microsoft offer to reduce exposure and increase security posture? There is quite a few. We can name some of the high level services which Microsoft provide, from a free tier to a premium tier base. So one of the touching points which I've done a few videos on now is multi-factor authentication. So making sure we've got the likes of security defaults enforced. If you're not using security defaults, and maybe conditional access or per user, all dependent based on your current estate, how many users you've got, how many devices you've got, what type of management you want over the enforcement of MFA. In fact, you've then got identity protection. So this is all about your behavioral analytics, anomaly detection. So you can start creating the likes of user risk policies, sign-in risk policies, and off the back of that, there will be conditions, there will be enforcement actions. So the likes of enforcement of MFA, as well as restricting access to particular services based off of the conditions of the identity protection policies. And that's more of the proactive response than the reactive, in essence. Identity governance, so take into account role-based access control, so just-in-time access as and when you need access, not just given permanent access. This could be on a request basis. This could be on an elevation process or workflow where the user has to elevate into the role by asking for access through a invitation. Access reviews, okay, making sure that the owners of your Microsoft 365 groups or teams or SharePoint sites are always validated, making sure they're up to date. There's no legacy users which were employed and now left, for example. These are all things we should be touching upon. You've got Microsoft Defender. So we touched upon Defender for Endpoint, but Microsoft Defender as a whole. Okay, so Microsoft Defender for a whole, you've got Microsoft Defender for 365, you've got Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, and you've got Identity. Okay, so 365 is more for the ATP side of Microsoft, so the advanced threat protection, making sure your email is secure, as well as endpoint, making sure your endpoints are secure in terms of physical devices. So that could be your laptops, that could be, Windows devices, Mac OS, Android, a whole load there. And then you got identity. So maybe you are still in a hybrid approach in which you are transitioning over to cloud, or you just want to remain in a hybrid approach until Microsoft say otherwise. Then you've got the identity solution there to not just manage your cloud services, but your on-premise AD domain services, for example, and make sure there's no loss of visibility from that perspective. Okay. You got Microsoft Sentinel, which is obviously the cloud native SIEM or SOAR collection of logs, that single pane of glass to pull all that information you're getting from Microsoft Defender from identity protection into one single pane of glass, of which you can make workbooks and send those out maybe on a bi-weekly basis to whoever's managing the estate, just to make sure you're in a good enough spot to say, okay, we've done all we can in terms of security. We've reduced our exposure and we're not seeing any active or persistent threats. You got Microsoft Endpoint Manager, so your MDM solution, your mobile device management solution, alongside your MAM, so that's your mobile application management solution, of which you can manage devices, have some oversight on your devices in your estate. So if that is restricting a particular use, outside a particular location, maybe a remote wipe, maybe the whole out-of-box experience in terms of Windows Autopilot deployment. Okay, there's a whole vast of technologies there which will help you secure your environments and make sure it's as streamlined as possible, so you're not missing out on any of the minimal exposure points which threat actors can take advantage of. You got Defender for Cloud, which obviously touches upon Defender for Servers, as well as that whole Azure Security Posture Management, the XDR, as well as Azure Lighthouse. So similar to Sentinel in terms of that single pane of glass, but just getting that lighthouse effect in terms of all your resources you've created, all the services you spun up in terms of Azure, just pulling that all in together. Especially if you're managing multiple customers, you want to be able to see cross-tenant, resources in terms of, okay, we deploy Z amount there, we deploy Z amount there, and you pull that into one single pane of glass to be able to have that full high-level oversight into multiple estates and tenancies. Microsoft and Azure Purview, so that's that information protection, data governance. Okay, so making sure, if you've got something sensitive on your machine, you are labeling it correctly. The retention period is associated with those labels. Maybe you need to, like I said, retain information for a Z amount of time. Maybe it's part of your GDPR offering. There's a whole load of things you can do with information protection, which we can get onto, and loads more services. Obviously, all license independent. If you are acquiring Microsoft 365 E5, you do get the vast majority of these services. I say the entry level to vast security is Microsoft 365 Business Premium at this point, which do get the likes of Microsoft Intune as well as Azure ADP one. So they're all touching points you should be made aware of. But other than that, this is a high level. This is what you should implement to reduce tenant exposure from that perspective. Some of the common attack techniques myself personally has come across, as well as you should be aware of in terms of reducing tenant exposure, and you should be implementing services around these types of attack techniques to reduce this, is the common malware attack. So common cyber attack, where malware or malicious software executes unauthorized actions on your end users' machines. So that could be a download of an application from a third-party source, or someone sent over a link you've clicked to download some software. Any of that, we should be making users aware by sending out, bi-weekly messages saying you should not click on this. There's vast services you can use to mitigate this, as well as proactive techniques in terms of sending email notifications to make people aware. If that's just a campaign, for example. Password spray, so variant of what is known as a brute force attack. For example, I've seen a lot of virtual machines being spun up with a public IP address, of which that public IP address has been exposed to the internet, with that threat actors, and then collating those IPv4 or IPv6 addresses, and then just brute forcing their way into the machine, either via maybe it doesn't have two-factor layer of security, so it's just that one password, and if the password is not long, or if it's a common password which has been exposed to the public domain, then by all means you're probably going to see an element of compromise at some given time. Phishing attacks, when attackers attempt to trick users into doing the wrong thing, so just clicking a bad link, like download malware, just like we referenced upon the malware attacks, as well as directed to a dodgy site, maybe to input their credit card details to obtain money, crypto mining techniques. There's a whole load there. And SQL injection, okay? It uses malicious SQL code for backend database manipulation to access information it was not intended. So that could be vast databases with user information on, it could be a medical center, a school, education. It's all stuff where there's layers of security we need to touch upon, and this is what is referred to the shared responsibility model, which we'll go on in a sec. So in terms of my security recommendations and what I recommend anyway in terms of enforcement, is obviously the enforcement of MFA. I can't say this enough. I think I've already created 2 videos on this, but enforcing all users of MFA, not just privileged roles, but all users, especially using the Authenticator app in this instance. SMS, phone call can all be intercepted by threat actors, but Authenticator app not just provides that 2-level layer of authentication, but also 3-level of authentication. You may have the app on your phone, which your app in itself has 2-factor on. Therefore, you're creating 3 layers of security at that point. Limiting the amount of global admins to less than 5. Ideally, it should be less than that. But if you are going to have maybe a Break-Glass account, you've got a few servers accounts which do leverage the global admin role, then by all means, but please make sure they're enforced with MFA, their passwords are lengthy, as well as there are, not just numerical, but also different variants in the password in terms of keywords, etc. Acquire the likes of Azure AD P1 and P2. But by default, if you are utilizing the free tier of Microsoft 365 licensing, you only get 7 days worth of audit login. If you do acquire the P1 or P2, that you extend that to 30 days. Okay. By all means, I tell you to purchase it now. If you are in a state of compromise, you only have that free tier at that given time, and then you purchase the P1 to get the 30-day logs. It only take into account that first initial day you license the account. So it's always good to have that audit login in the first place. So please do acquire the premium licensing. Configure PIM, so just-in-time access. That this could be for Azure AD roles, Azure role-based access control roles for your Azure management side of things, as well as groups as well. So just-in-time access to groups and virtual machines. Okay, there's a whole load PIM can do there, but you just want to make sure users or service accounts or service principals only have access at a given time they need to. If that is to do a project or to create a user, for example. Okay. Conduct access reviews on all policies, reporting, groups, identities, make sure nothing's inactive, make sure someone who has left has had all their roles removed. We don't want an example of user leaving, then able to make changes, or that accounts be left open to compromise. We just need to make sure we're all streamlined and cleaned up in terms of estate. If you are utilising the likes of Azure Plan or Azure Subscription, then do make use of Azure Thresholds, utilising the likes of cost management, and utilising the new dashboards in terms of analytics for consumption. There has recently just been an announcement in the Microsoft partner announcements, I believe commencing this month, in terms of a new dashboard for specifically partners and CSPs to be able to have a bit more insight into consumption-based services. Say for example, a customer was consuming maybe £100 a day, then a few days later they're consuming £1,000 a day. They'll be able to create an alert in which it will see that increase in consumption, and it'll be able to alert an admin to say, okay, you may want to verify and check this consumption is legit. Okay. Password set to never expire. It's always a strange one for me. Well, it's not a strange one, but a strange one for other people. Passwords should be set to never expire. If the password is good enough, you shouldn't have to change it. This is now Microsoft's recommendation. This is in their Microsoft documentation for best practices. The thing we get is when people change their password on a occasion, they will just add a numeric character at the end, or they'll just change it to something else they know. If your password's good enough, they shouldn't need to be changed. Okay. And remove roles and utilize GDAP. So previously there was delegated admin privileges if you were tied to a partner or a CSP. We're now utilizing the likes of GDAP, so that's more of that granular delegated admin privileges. Okay. So making sure the partner and CSP only has access as and when they need access to your customer tenant, as well as just general consensus across roles, okay, for both Azure AD and Azure rollback and role-based access control. If you see the little the strategy below, the comment statement, accounts are 99.9% less likely to be compromised if you use MFA. So it's always a good tool. So touching upon the shared responsibility model, the model kind of defines what the customer manager is, what the partner or cloud provider manages, as well as the responsibility by type and OS layer. Okay, so in terms of responsibility for information, data, devices, and accounts, these are fully managed by the customer. Hence why we refer you back to the services to reduce that. Okay, reduce the overhang, reduce the overhead management. Okay, reduce your security exposure, because at the end of the day, this is something the customer manages, which is you, the person who registers for the organization. Other than that, the liability does not lie with the provider or indirect partner. Okay, other than that, they're when you do work down the chain slightly, there is a bit of a hybrid approach in terms of who manages what. This could be Microsoft, this could be you, and then it starts to offload more and more to the vendor or to the provider, which in this instance is Microsoft, which obviously Microsoft manages the data center, the networking, the electricity. This is the whole adoption piece, wide cloud, because it takes that overhead off you. But what we'll start to see in the near enough future is this stuff will start to move more towards the provider and less to the customer. But other than that, this was just a high level, just making you aware of what's about in terms of security, how you can reduce that exposure. I'm here to help as and when. Please do reach out to me. I'm more than happy to provide you a bit more analysis. But like I said, these are just snapshots of what I've got in my head at the moment, and I can give to you, and try to enable the community. So thank you very much.